In my time as a delivery driver, I had seen a lot of strange things and had people try to tip me in some pretty weird ways. However, nothing compares to the time that a simple pizza delivery ended with me in the hospital with broken ribs and slight brain damage. It was summer vacation, and I had just graduated from high school. I was working as a pizza delivery driver to make some extra money to take to college with me the next year, and all in all, it was a really easy job. One night, we got an order that came in, and it was pretty standard, just 2 pies and a soda to be delivered. Once the food was cooked, I packed it into my car and made my way through my delivery route. When I got to the house, I could see 2 vehicles in the driveway and thought I could hear people talking. I turned my car off and hopped out with the pizzas and began looking around for the people that I was now certain I was hearing, but I couldn't see anyone. I began to make my way down the driveway toward the house, and sure enough, the voices had gotten louder. I realized that what I was hearing was yelling coming from inside the house while I was delivering the pizzas. I sighed and immediately became uncomfortable. It sounded like people were arguing inside, and I really didn't want to deal with any of that. I got to the door and proceeded to knock, but no one answered at first. All I could hear was the sound of the 2 people arguing inside the house. I knocked again, but this time a bit louder, and I heard a man's voice call out from inside the house, "Who the hell is it?" But before I could answer, the front door swung open, and standing on the other side was a woman who appeared to have been crying. She looked at me and then called back into the house, "It's just the pizza guy." So I went with my usual routine when it came to deliveries, which were for me to ask how their evening was going, and then proceed to confirm the order and tell them the price. In this instance, though, I never got past the "How are you?" I asked the woman very casually, "How are we doing this evening?" before getting ready to read through the order, but before she could reply, I once again heard the man yelling from inside the house, "What did he ask you?" I heard him ask as the man walked to the door and pushed the woman out of the way. Standing before me now was a man who was about a half a foot taller than me, and you could smell the smell of alcohol coming off of him from multiple feet away. I was frozen. I didn't know how to respond, but even if I did, I don't think he would have given me time to. "Do you know him?" he asked the woman as he glared at her and then at me. He began stepping out of the house toward me, and I couldn't think of anything to do other than to run away. I dropped the pizzas and turned to run down the steps and toward my car. But before I could make it there, I was tackled to the ground. I felt the wind get forced out of me as the man fell on top of me. He stood to his feet and began kicking me in the chest and stomping on my head over and over again. I could hear the woman screaming for him to stop before I passed out. I woke up in a hospital bed with the police and my parents by my side. They explained to me what had happened and that they had arrested the man for assault as well as domestic violence. After the woman called the police on him, I ended up with 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and all sorts of bruising. The rest of my summer was pretty much me, just recuperating in my house. Meanwhile, the man was eventually sentenced to 8 years in prison. One of the craziest experiences I ever had in my life came when I was 19 years old and delivering pizzas in the town where I grew up. As far as I could remember, nothing ever happened in that town. It was a small area and it felt like everyone knew each other. But after dropping off pizzas at a particular address, that perception all changed. You see, it was 2011, and as I remember, it was a fairly busy evening. So my boss was constantly calling me to let me know that we had more orders to be delivered. I didn't mind though, because those were usually decent nights for tips as well. So I just went about my business. The night came to an end for me though, when we received an order to an address that I had never actually gone to before. I pulled up to the house and could tell right away that whoever lived there didn't take care of it. The exterior of the home was practically falling apart, and the yard was vastly overgrown. It wasn't my job to judge though, so I simply grabbed the food and knocked on the door. Only a few seconds had passed before the door was answered by a slightly overweight man who had a receding hairline and large round glasses that made his eyes look huge. When he answered the door, he had an unusual smile on his face and didn't say anything. I told him the total, which was $22, and he handed me $30 before closing the door in my face without saying anything. I shrugged off his rude attitude and began walking to my car, happy that I had gotten an $8 tip. But when I looked back to the house, that feeling quickly faded. Looking toward the house, I noticed something in the upstairs window. It looked like a small piece of paper. I had to squint to read it, but once I could make it out, it was clear that the sign said "Help" on it. I looked at the window next to the sign, and I could see a child that looked like a young boy standing next to it and looking out toward me. I got back into my car and pulled my phone out to call the police as I tried not to take my eyes off the window. The police answered, and I began to explain the sign that I had seen and gave the dispatcher the address. All the while I was still looking at the kid. Then, all of a sudden, the child turned and dropped the sign as if they got caught. I asked the dispatcher to hurry, and they informed me that the police would be there in a few minutes. As I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher, I noticed the man was walking out of his house now and down his driveway toward my car. I told the woman on the phone about it, and she told me to stay calm and act like I wasn't on the phone. When the man got to my window, he leaned down and asked me what I was still doing on his property. I tried to come up with a lie and began to say that I was having trouble with my car, but he claimed that my car seemed fine. I began to get flustered, which was when he asked me why I was really there. I didn't know what to say to him, which was when he began to get frustrated and tried to open my car door. I managed to keep it closed and locked, while also closing the window all the way, but to my horror, the man had turned and picked up a large rock from his driveway. Before he could throw it at my window, though, he was stopped as 4 police cars came flying down the road and into his driveway. The police began to question both of us, and I explained to them what I had seen in the window, which prompted them to enter the man's house, which he was not happy about. The officers found 3 children inside a room that had been padlocked shut from the outside. All 3 children were linked to missing person cases from the tri-state area. And according to the officers, the room that they were kept in looked as if they were trapped in there 24/7 for months at the very least. The man was living in our town without any of us knowing about it or being the wiser. Therefore, I will never look at my small town as safe again. As a delivery driver, it isn't too uncommon to drop food off at the same address multiple nights in a row, especially on holiday weekends or during the summer. However, after what happened 2 years ago, I certainly be wary if it continued to happen. You see, I had been working as a delivery driver for one of the 3 pizza places in my town, and for a short period of time, while my car was in the shop, I had to borrow my mother's car, which happened to be a Tesla Model S from 2018. And within that week of me driving her car, you wouldn't believe how many people asked me why I would be delivering pizzas if I could afford a car like that. I typically just laughed the comment off and told them to have a good night. However, there was one residence that would not stop talking to me about it, and that's when things got strange. You see, the first night that an order had been placed from that address, I pulled into the driveway, and when I got to the door with the pizza, a man answered who appeared to be in his mid-20s. He commented on the car as he got his money together, and then he paid me, and I was on my way. The next night, though, I noticed that around 7, we got an order from that same address, and I didn't think anything of it, so I just went to deliver their food. This time, when I pulled in though, I noticed 3 people were sitting on the porch, one of which was the man to who I delivered the pizza the previous evening. I got out of my car and began getting the pizza out of the passenger side, but before I could get them entirely out of the car, all 3 of the men on the porch approached me. They all started talking about how nice the car was and making jokes about how well I must be getting paid. I laughed it off and handed them their pizza, expecting to get paid and just be on my way. But this time, they had begun to make small talk with me, asking me how long I owned the car and if I lived in the area. At that point, I was getting a bit uncomfortable, especially since I could see 2 of the 3 guys looking into the car. That was when I decided to tell them that I needed to get back to work and got back into my car. As I was getting ready to pull away, I heard one of the men ask me what time I got off work, which I was not expecting. I was thrown off. I couldn't even think of a lie, so I told them I got off around 10 when we closed, and then I left. The entire rest of the night, I kept thinking about how odd it was for them to ask me all those personal questions, but I just brushed it off as people being friendly. The next day was when it all changed, and I found out why they were trying to be all chummy. You see, I was happy to see that address hadn't ordered anything that night. At least that's what I thought. However, around 9:30 p.m., we received a call for a single plain pizza to be delivered to the same address that I had gone to twice before. I didn't like the idea of going back there, but there was nothing I could do. They hadn't done anything wrong at that point aside from making me uncomfortable. But still, when I pulled into the driveway, I was prepared to have my ear talked off again. To my surprise though, when I got to the front door, the man answered and was very brief with his transaction. And as I was walking back to the Tesla, I was relieved. I began to make my way out of the driveway, and as I put my blinker on, I looked in my rearview mirror. I was confused. I could see in the driveway behind me, someone had started their car and was getting ready to pull out behind me. I tried to brush it off as nothing, but as I continued to make my way down the road, I couldn't help but feel like I was being followed. I decided to take a very convoluted route back to the pizzeria, one with a lot of unnecessary turns to throw off the person behind me, but it didn't work. That's when I knew for a fact that I was being followed. I called my boss and told him what was going on and that I was almost back to the restaurant. And when I got there, he ushered me inside and locked the door behind me. He and I both watched as the car that was following me parked at the gas station across the street and faced their car toward my job. My boss decided that he didn't like what was going on, so he called the police and we both waited for them to arrive. One car pulled into the pizzeria and another into the gas station and promptly began talking to the people in the car that was following me. When all was said and done, the police found 2 handguns in their car, along with bandanas that they believed were going to be used to mask their appearance. The police couldn't do anything about the situation specifically, but the 2 men were arrested for their firearms as well as having outstanding warrants in relation to an armed robbery that occurred the year prior.